Now, real people, real opinions. Nighttime talk with Niall Boylan.
Ireland's classic hits radio.
In the news today, we had a big story, of course, and one many of you will have an opinion on. The High Court has ruled Ireland is breaching international human rights laws over its failure to house those who have sought international protection in this country. Immigrants. It says the state's failure to provide for the basic needs of unaccommodated asylum seekers breaches their right to human dignity under the EU's Charter of Fundamental Rights. This case, of course, was taken by the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. One wonders why they didn't take a case like this before now. Of course, there's been people homeless in this country for years. We had, up to all this started, probably 3 or 4 years ago, or around COVID time, we had 12,000 people in temporary accommodation in this country. Why didn't the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission take a case then? One wonders. Anyway, now this is going to rub a lot of you up the wrong way, I know. And by the way, it's a bit of a test of the Constitution, in a sense, because if we're saying it's against a person's human rights, well, in this particular case, obviously, it was taken by refugees or immigrants, but if we're saying it's against people's human rights to be unaccommodated, we're essentially testing our own constitution, because currently the constitution at the moment, you only have a right to shelter. You don't have a right to much more than that. But there has been calls for the constitution to be changed. That would be a referendum needed for that, to give you a right to accommodation and housing. So essentially what the High Court is doing is it's interpreting the constitution, suggesting that, well, certainly the Minister for Integration, Roderick O'Gorman, when he sent out that little tweet to everybody, inviting them to Ireland and saying, come to Ireland and you'll have your own hall door key or front door key by whatever it was. I mean, essentially that you're entitled to accommodation, but he didn't provide it. And he can't provide it, and he's not going to be able to provide it. Let's be clear about it. Not with the numbers that are coming into Ireland at the moment. The best we're going to provide is a paint factory or a warehouse. And even at that, there's going to be problems. You can clearly see that. It's going to rub a lot of people up the wrong way. But are they wrong? Should we be using people, or should we be putting people into tents, housing people in tents? Probably not. But it also begs the question, where is the High Court ruling about the government's failure to house Irish citizens? Why hasn't someone taken a case? And if they did, why didn't they give the same ruling? Tonight I want to talk about this. But I also want to ask, once and for all, is housing a human right? Is it a human right? Now, I argued against this going back many years ago when this came up first. I think this is before we had a situation, an accommodation crisis to the way we have it now, that somehow housing should be a human right. A 3-bed house. Should it be a human right to have a 3-bed house? Sure, if that's the case, why bother working? We could all just pack in our jobs tomorrow. The government will give us the dole. They give us a house. They look after us. They give us a fuel allowance. And sure, a medical card. What more would we need? We can just sit there if we want and do nothing, unless you want to do better in life. So it's something we all aspire to, is having a house. Home ownership, by the way, is a very Irish and British thing, because the rest of Europe, they rent quite a lot. I think it would be more in line with the government of this country to make housing affordable. That's what we really need, not to have it as a human right. But anyway, do you believe housing is a human right? Because if it is a human right, well, then you're saying that everybody coming into this country equally is entitled to that right, according to the government and according to the High Court. So let me know what you think. The number is 087 188 0008. Personally, I think this ruling is an absolute and utter joke. All right, let's go to some of our callers. Elaine, hi, how are you?
Hi, Niall, how are you?
Good. There's kind of two questions here. It's a kind of loaded thing, isn't it? Because the High Court has kind of thrown the cat amongst the pigeons today in relation to this. But is housing or accommodation a human right?
I don't think it should be, Neil or Niall. Like you said there, we're opening up our doors to the world and we can't house the world. And I think what the government are doing at the moment is completely unsustainable, and they're openly discriminating against their own Irish people. And we already have our own homeless crisis in Ireland, and they're failing to tackle that at every aspect and fund what is coming in and then house them on top of it, along with Roderick O'Gorman's little message as well he sent out. It's just not sustainable now.
Yeah. Well, Roderick O'Gorman is dead set to continue doing what he's doing, as he said on the news today on an RTE, that he's going to continue with his plan for Coolock, continue with his plan for Dundrum, which is essentially to double the population of a small town. He's continuing to do that.
I just, you know what, Niall, I find that this government that have been selected and sole power with the coalition party have acted very, very sneakily and cunningly over the last couple of years. And this, Niall, I just want to say something, that on the 3rd of December 2021, Helen McEntee brought in a bill where we were going to regularize all undocumented migrants' lives inside in Ireland. Mm-hmm. So that was in 2021. And then we had the proxy war in Ukraine kick off. And I just find, Niall, that the government have piggybacked off of a war that was ongoing with the last 10 years. And they have absolutely invaded our land. Even though we had 2 opt-out clauses to not take these people, we didn't have a moral or legal obligation. But again, we're tolerant. We're the kids need a fault of the world. And we're very welcoming people. But I think people's patience now are wearing thin. And I find that this bill, it's something that hasn't been announced in too many places. And people should know it, because we're a small, tiny island. And the bill, Niall, that they're trying to bring in, the 39th Amendment, is this housing for all. It's not a housing for all bill. It's not a housing for all bill. It's a housing for residents in the land, not the citizens, for the residents of the land. And it clearly states that on that bill. And it states that the state in particular recognises the common good as including the right to secure affordable, dignified housing appropriate to need for all residents, not citizens, Niall, residents of Ireland, and should guarantee this right through its laws, policies and prioritisation of resources. Now, we also have the hate speech bills in as well, Niall, where Ireland, the Irish people, are separated completely from that bill, where we have no right at all, and we're being suppressed under that bill.
Okay, I've spoken about the hate speech bill quite a lot, and as you may know, I'm a big proponent. I'm completely against the idea of it. Anything, by the way, that takes away the right to speak in any way, or the freedom to speak, I'm against. But in relation to what we're talking about, let's go back to what we're talking about. So the High Court ruled, and by the way, I don't remember the last time that the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission took a case before all of this, say in relation to the 10,000, if you go back to 2018, 10,000 Irish people who were homeless at the time, essentially, and 14,000 now Irish people who are homeless. They didn't take a case then, so I don't know why it's so important all of a sudden now. But I mean, going along with what you're saying there, the Red C poll that out yesterday, 72% of Irish people believe there should be very strict limits on the number of immigrants coming into Ireland. On top of that as well, there was also part of that, I'm looking for it here, 72 respondents also believe the government had lost control of immigration. 75% of those were women and 69% of those were men. Surprisingly enough, more women than men. Almost a third of voters believe in a number of different, according to the way it's been written in the paper, conspiracy theories of the Great Replacement Theory and secret medical trials. So now, by the way, can I just point out this idea that it's a conspiracy theory? Now, there are conspiracy theories, don't get me wrong, about that there's some man behind the curtain somewhere, right? But without a shadow of a doubt, the CSO released figures going back 2 weeks ago about the population of Ireland in 2057 if we continue with the current scenario. And it's quite clear that if we continued beyond that again, that, you know, Indigenous Irish people, or people born in this country, will be in the minority in population. All right? So it's a clear figure. Now, I was talking to somebody about this yesterday, and they said to me, well, so what's the big deal about that? That's just progression, isn't it? And I was going, well, what about the right to keep our identity, to keep our culture, to keep all of that? And you go, well, you can keep all of that if you want to, because people who come in here will adapt to that culture and identity. And I go, well, I don't always think that people do. People don't sometimes integrate very well. Anyway, the point is, do you think we have a right to hold on to our identity and culture?
I think that the Irish ethnic people should have a right to affordable housing. And not everyone will be able to afford a house, Niall. Some won't have progressed that far in life. Some will never own a home. And I think that our own ethnic minority should be prioritised above all, absolutely. And I think when we have that done, when we have that sorted and we have our boat level, then we can start assessing what we're bringing in.
I assume when you say your own ethnic Irish, you mean Irish citizens. Irish citizens is what you're...
The ethnic Irish people of Ireland, Niall, And I think as well, you know what, Niall? The International Protection Act, Section 15A and B, have allowed for this lawful, unlawful, undocumented, unvetted migration. It's actually a policy to take in undocumented.
Well, it is part of the EU Migration Pact now, which has been voted in by EU MEPs in the last 2 months. So it is part of policy now, and it is something that's going to be implemented over the next 2 years. And by the way, there are parts of the EU Migration Pact would be great if we actually did it, but we didn't have to be part of a pact to do that. We should be doing those things anyway. If we suddenly implement measures,
we need to start vetting them and breaking down and going through these documents a lot faster and seeing then And there is no deportation order process in this country. We need one set up. We need these people vetted. We need their backgrounds ran against Interpol. We have taken in people that shouldn't be here at all, and we're now importing crime on top of what our own are committing, and it's not sustainable. We don't have enough police in the streets. We don't have the resources. We don't have the accommodation. We don't have the schooling, the doctors, the dentists. We don't have it, Niall. It's not sustainable. And they're telling us that everything that they're doing in society today is sustainable for Klaus Schwab's New World Order. It's not sustainable.
Okay.
They are causing chaos throughout Europe.
I know a lot of people believe, 30% of voters, by the way, believe, there's a small secret group responsible for all this. That's probably one thing I would disagree with John Elaine. I don't think the Irish government are clever enough to be involved in any kind of plan with anybody else. I do believe there's a plan to increase the population. Of course there is, because they don't want to be in a situation in 30 years' time where they can't afford pensions. On top of the fact that the High Court has ruled that accommodation should be a fundamental human right. Like water, like everything else. Well, water's not even a human right, actually, in this country, because we had that whole argument during the water tax thing that time they want to charge people water tax, and people are saying it's a fundamental right. They're saying, well, no, it's not. Clean water is a fundamental right to some degree. Anyway, the question I want to ask you is, do you believe that housing and accommodation should be a fundamental right? Because according to the High Court, it should be, but that's not the way our Constitution goes. The High Court seems to have interpreted it in a certain way. Let me know what you think. The number is 087 188 0008. All right, welcome back. Cheapers creepers. I think I'm going to melt in here. Okay, speaking of melting, people's temperatures are certainly rising, thinking about this whole thing. Now, it is very complicated in a sense because we're talking about the Constitution of the country. But, as they always say, the Constitution will change all the time. It's a growing Constitution. And there was a suggestion some time ago that we should change the Constitution to give accommodation and housing, to make it a human right. Now, there are very few things that are human rights, because when you have something that's a human right, it means that if the government don't give it to you, well, then you can demand it and also demand compensation if you haven't given it. We've now set ourselves up for massive failure here, because with the High Court making this ruling, in 20 or 30 years' time, we're going to have a lot of resentment. And people who are still here, who are here now, international protection applicants, will most likely sue the state for a breach of international human rights. And they'd say, when we came here 20 years ago, you had us sleeping in tents in Mount Street because you had nowhere to put us. And for that, we're going to sue you because it's damaged our lives. And that's what's going to happen, because the High Court has now ruled that the state has a legal obligation, a European legal obligation, to house people.